Hey folks, Mike's back. I usually ask the question, do you miss me? But quite frankly, I don't know if you do. Quite simply, I know that I have not been a consistent force on this platform. As a lot of other current tech radios are. There's many out there that do a much better job than me of getting on here. Now, the seat is so short, I feel like a midget. I'm in a smaller chair, not in my regular big chair. So let's get it perfectly clear. I am not a regular YouTuber like most of them are. I'm just an average, ordinary Canadian person, near retirement age, who's decided to become part of the platform and hopes to become a larger part of the platform over time as I get more engaged involved in it. But here's the problem with everything in life. Just like the current situation in the political sphere of the Trump tariff threat to Canada, and of course Canada is responsible on both our conservative and liberal parties in regards to this, and the reasons why those responses are the way, they're all about distraction. What do I mean by distraction? Everyday life is distraction. You wake up in the morning, you don't feel like getting up, you decide, oh, I'll do this later. You find other things to do besides that. By the time you do those things, you think, oh, it's too late to do the thing you were planning on doing. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, and the same thing happens, rinse and repeat. I guess that's my life in a sort of nutshell now. I've got to the point where I'm having a lot of interest in things that are demanding my attention. Having a relationship with someone after not having it for so long can be considered by some people a distraction. Sometimes you get worried that if you don't pay enough attention to that relationship, you lose it. So you put a lot of effort into it. Sometimes too much. Sometimes not enough. You don't know. But life is full of what I said, distractions. And politics is no different. Take a look at the current situation with the American president, Donald Trump. Donald Trump was elected and he mandated on a populist platform of making America great again. Now people say that's kind of silly. You did the first time. Why didn't you make it great the first time? Well, the problem, unfortunately, with all politics is you only get a certain amount of time to go and make a difference. And what happens is that's not enough. A lot of the systemic changes that happen in society that need to be done to make a real difference in any society, whether it be Canada, the United States, or any other country, require long-term planning, long-term stability. Unfortunately, politics doesn't currently allow us to have stability. It just doesn't. You usually get 4 or maybe 5 years, depending on the term, whether you get a majority mandate in Canada in this case, or a minority mandate, which is what we're currently dealing with, which is where all the uncertainty has happened. The fact that you have a third party involved, which is something unique to nations like Canada, makes the mix even more significantly strained. Since we have a parliamentary democracy as opposed to a Republican system, which the Americans have, where the president, the leader of the free world, the leader of the government, is a separate elected official that is elected by a separate mandate among, in this case, usually 2 candidates, the Democrat, the liberal side, and the Republican, which tends to be the more conservative side. Now, I use those words very loosely because the fact is there are a lot of conservatives that are more ultra-liberal than they are conservative, and certain liberals that are more ultra-conservative than they're conservative, or parts of their platform nuance are available everything. No person is truly either conservative or liberal, but they have to fall under a banner, so they choose a banner that represents, hopefully, what represents their most prevalent trait. Hence, they run under that banner, and that's the banner they go under, and hope that the other things where they don't necessarily agree with other conservatives, they can find consensus, in this case, with the other side, ironically enough, which is kind of a funny thing, that you're finding consensus with the other side as opposed to your side. Silly issue. And both liberals and conservatives do this all the time. In the back rooms, they don't talk about it, but we, if you pay attention, all know this. Canada doesn't have that situation. Canada has a situation where the leader of the country, the leader of the free world and of Canada, our world of the world, whatever you want to call it, the world, part of the world, is an elected member who belongs to, is leader of the party who gets the most votes in the overall legislature. Completely different departure from the American system, where the American system literally have a president elected by majority of people by the electoral college, who has a government in terms of the executive, of the lower branches, the legislative branch, that are completely and utterly against him. This has happened several times over the history of America. And has led to a lot of problems because that happens is the president has one mandate. He can veto anything the other sides want to do. And of course the other sides can propose things and with the hope that the president will not veto them, forcing much negotiations to get anything done at all on both sides of the aisle. Now, given the fact there's three houses, the executive branches, and there's two levels of legislation, there's a Congress and there's a Senate, all three branches elected, of course, in America, where Canada does not have an elected Senate yet and should have one, I think. It would make more sense in a modern democracy to have elected term Senate as opposed to a non-elected for life Senate, or in the case of Stephen Harper, a term Senate at a term when you reach a certain age in the Senate, which hopefully might be a solution to the problem to some degree. But the fact is, when senators get appointed, usually what happens is the government in power, or the government that is going out of power, typically appoints any elected senators, any appointed senators, just near the end of its mandate to guarantee they can cause most disruption for the next government, especially if they don't think they're going to be the next government. That's sort of a stopgap insurance to limit the powers of the next government by hobbling to some sort of degree, by making the Senate an obstacle to any changes that might be too radical against whatever the agenda of the government was that was out of favor. Even if the government is no longer in the favor of the constituents, even if the people who are elected to go against this government, who have set a clear mandate to the government, the Senate can still hobble to some degree the ability of that government to make the changes in there, even though they are elected mandate and the Senate is not. Something a lot of people talk about is the reason why this needs to be changed right now. But let's not talk about that particular part. We cannot really do much about the Senate. The Senate is what it is what it is. Let's just talk about the current situation in Canada and how things are in terms of how we end up having to react to everything the Americans do. Not just Canada, but every nation that deals with the United States has to react to America. And having different governments, in the case of Joe Biden was a laissez-faire type of government. He let a lot of things go on that nobody thought would possibly go on, and a lot of shenanigans went around the world between a lot of nations who knew they could get away with a lot of stuff, and they did. They very much did. The American people decided, or at least the majority of American people decided, because the president, and the other houses, by the way, so I mean, it wasn't just a mandate to change the head of the state, it was a mandate to change the majority of the members of the legislature itself, giving the state a little bit of credence and a little bit more credibility in terms of his changes and his justification for making these changes as far as the people's trust in him for this mandate. He's put a mandate to deal with a couple of issues. One was obviously trade. The other issue was manufacturing in the States and how manufacturing power in the United States is completely under the years. Very successful governments and businesses over time have diminished this simply because profits, costs and profits. American workers and North American workers keep demanding more and more wages, raising the cost of goods because it affects the overall profitability of goods to be made. So manufacturers, obviously, in order to combat this, have moved manufacturing, usually offshore, forming companies in offshore places where they pay a lot less for labor, where the governments are more lenient to labor standards and labor wages and stuff like that. To allow these companies to pay less, even with the exporting and import of parts, it still becomes less expensive in the end than making those very same goods on a factory floor anywhere in North America. Hence why so much of our manufacturing, especially in technology, is moved overseas. So to try to reverse that is kind of an ironic thing, because what's happened is the people that have relied on this, the businesses that rely on it, the corporations, the stockholders, the shareholders that rely on it, the consumers that rely on these low-priced goods coming in of high quality, at one time they were, overall, but compared to North American-made goods, have gotten used to these goods coming from these places now, and the carnage that was done by the manufacturing jobs leaving as a result of all this disruption during the 60s and 70s and 80s, especially the 70s, 80s, and 90s, have already gone through the system, and those people have moved on to other things. People are not looking for manufacturing jobs in the fields they used to look for, and before that, those people have since retired and moved on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other things that got lost in the shuffle. One of the things that got lost is the ability to repair things. Things have been made because they're making them so inexpensive now. these companies only can make profits if they make it so hard to repair or so diminishingly expensive to repair that the cost-benefit analysis over buying new is a diminishing return. That's one of the things that's happened because of this. Things have been made, and the things are made more and more difficult, requiring users to either pay the companies that have the few companies that still want to service things, and the larger things like farm equipment and stuff that obviously can't be transported by manufacturer is likely still very expensive to that has to be replaced on a regular basis and does have to be serviced because realistically people don't replace it that often because it is very expensive. So the only way these companies can make money is they have to make sure they can generate revenue from manufacturers having the ability to repair it and have technicians work for them, which they can hire and pay. If the user does this, the manufacturing labor force revenue just drops. You can't let people fix things if you want to keep control of them. You want to keep control of that sweet, sweet revenue stream in between when you're manufacturing your goods until the next one comes out. But that's not what I want to talk about. We're going to talk about this tariff. We're going to talk about this whole issue with Trump and what the particular effect of what he's done and why it is the way it is. I think this is sort of a thing that most people don't understand. I think you really have to sit down and think about this for a second and understand truly why we're in the position we're in right now in terms of this whole situation. It's pretty simple. You got an American president who's got a running mandate, who's believing that he feels that his country has been unfairly treated by other nations, which they have been. But it's obviously the making of their own people indirectly. The industries in those countries are the ones that are responsible for a lot of these things happening, switching trade to countries that make less expensive. The oil pact is also a part of it in terms of the oil sector. That was a treaty that's been there for so long. It's been through successive presidents. It was working to a certain degree all this time. It still, I think, does work. And even despite the fact that most of the manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing is made overseas now, for many of these overseas companies then moving some domestic manufacturing to avoid the tariffs that would come eventually from foreign governments having to bring things in to try to offset the low cost of these goods. So that was one way that the Americans and Canadians had sort of got back some of the manufacturing capability. But it was not with domestic companies doing this mostly. It was mostly foreign companies that were doing this. You'll see a larger number of foreign companies sitting at factories here that do either final phase manufacturing or they sometimes manufacture almost the whole product, except for maybe the basic stages back in their home country. For a simple reason: one, because the market is here. Two, most of these places like Japan are very, very small, and there's only so much manufacturing footprint to make things there, and to make a lot of different things. In fact, the mass quantities of cars in North America being in Japan from cradle to grave would be at the quality that they want to supply to make a decent profit is unrealistic with a place that's so damn small. So it actually makes sense to do the major manufacturing as far as the key components in Japan or China or Korea, wherever the hell country is the source country, ship those parts instead of the whole manufactured good to North American factory. They get assembled here in North America. They get North American free trade status, which allows them to transport here without being paid any dues, even though half the manufacturing was done overseas. The main manufacturing components were done as far as the key components were manufactured overseas. And the lower skilled labor assembly jobs were put here so they can put the goods here. And they could also train certain numbers of people to repair these goods unnecessary in the case of the ones that are larger, manufacture things like cars and even some larger appliances to some degree. So that's fine. And that's not what I'm talking about either. What I'm talking about the fact is that Donald Trump has decided that America has been unfairly treated in many ways. They've been treated fairly NATO. Let's face it, America puts more money to NATO than the nation, including Canada. Canada has not been keeping up this weight with NATO for quite some time. The successive governments, most liberals, but conservative governments too, and various things, have had difficulty keeping a large commitment to NATO, even though we have a large nation that has to be defended, and we're not pulling up our weight in defense of our own nation. We rely too much on the American friends to do this, and of course the American friends know this, and of course they've only done not because they love us, because we're next to the next neighbor restriction on China, and they need to protect us, or as a gateway to prevent China from coming in or Russia coming in to invade them, because that's what would happen is if Canada became too vulnerable. Those countries would use Canada as a staging ground for invasion of America. Hence why we are so well protected. So let's not kid ourselves here about that. Secondly, the fact is that these countries outside the world have decided that since Canada has become a very, very weak country defensively in terms of crime and punishment and other types of struggling propositions, that's now also become the gateway for many things like drugs. drugs and illegal peoples have become the major issue. And this is the real issue Trump has. Trade is one thing. That's definitely a issue that does bug him. The fact that he doesn't feel that American and Canada are very fair trading partners. There's too many barriers on the American side and the Canadian side. Although there are some barriers on the American side too, reciprocally, that have been sort of put up over the years, that each side is guilty to some degree of this type of protectionism in certain industries on their own, and has led to consumers on each side not necessarily getting the best quality or price for the goods in reciprocal on both sides of the border, and are attempting to protect industries that either A, are just not ever going to be competitive for whatever reason, or have been stymied from being competitive through the fact that they've been protected by boards, marketing boards, and other sort of mechanisms that are very anti-competitive and anti-productive, and actually hamper companies in order to maintain a maximum cost per item, and thinking that farmers need to have that type of protection to survive, that they cannot survive just in the open marketplace, which I think is very, 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 very strange. And I don't know why anyone puts up with that type of attitude, being told that we have to protect you because you're so weak and there's no way you can defend yourselves in the open market. You can never compete in the open marketplace, which is exactly what they're telling them. So, opposite of that, okay, tries to put these tariffs on to basically get Canada's attention. And boy, oh boy, it has. Now, here's where it comes down to. The Liberals on both sides think this is a bad thing, and they're going to play it as such because they want to play constituents to show how Orange Man bad, that he's a bad influence and he's going to ruin America, and in Canada, he's going to ruin Canada. Unfortunately, the Canadian response to the same thing has come more or less the same from all parties, both Liberal and Conservative. And I think I want to explain to the people out there the reason why this is. The fundamental thing that makes Canada unique, and this particular situation in time unique, and here's a history. The other party, obviously, that's the lame duck party right now, they're in the process of trying to revive themselves. This issue's come along, and let's face it, helped pop up the Liberal Party, because now they can say we're going to be the champions of this, and we'll say the other side's not going to be, and if they get elected, Canada's going to be destroyed, and that's that. But I've noticed in the case of Liberals, this is a predominant trait. Liberals have a tendency to project upon the other side of the issue the threats and fears that people should really have about them. 95% of the time, every time Liberals try to put a thing through a threat from the Conservative side being in Canada, it typically, because we should be looking for that threat from, is the Liberal side. Not just because the Liberals are on this side, but the fact that we have a three-party system in terms of the larger parties in Canada. We have the NDP. The NDP represent a splinter part of liberalism that represents very far-right socialist values. It tends to claim itself as a labor-based party. And because of being claimed a labor-based party, the fact is that it tends to try and side on labor, or at least appear to side on labor. Many times they have a difficult time with that, because the fact is that sometimes labor steps over its edge and causes problems for other people in the society, mainly people that are poor and disadvantaged, by forcing their rights. So there's a hard balance between supporting the rights of labor and supporting the rights of the companies and the people that are affected by these disruptions in the first place, whether they're started by the employer or the employer, sometimes both. So then the DDP party has a difficult thing to show. They know they'll never ever get enough support to get power because they're too far left, but they always tend to be, when the Liberals get into trouble, they end up being the balance of power between keeping the Conservatives out of power and keeping the Liberals in power. And now have loved to use that issue as a wedge to try and attempt to appear to advance their causes as a sort of blackmail towards keeping the government in power. And the Liberal Party does not want to go back to the polls at that point, at least at that point for the longest time, because they knew what was happening is that over time the luster had fallen on Trudeau's paint. And because the luster had fallen on the paint, they knew that they were in trouble. And the only problem was when Trudeau came in, he said, I want the power to decide when I want to leave. You can't just get rid of me. Even after many of the members voiced absolute concern about this particular thing, Trudeau decided to invoke that power until we finally got to the point where the pressure became so intense that now we have this situation. So let's just let's just summarize what is going on in terms of nuance of this position. Now you get Trudeau deciding to finally give up power, just around the time that the whole thing when Trump comes into the play of becoming a powerhouse in the world and wants to exert his power, now to show people who's boss. The Liberals are now being pushed in a situation that they have to look for a new leader. They can't carry on with the leader they got, and they have to find a new one because Trudeau stepped aside and they have to do something about changing the image of the Liberal Party in order to fight what might be the next election coming up soon. We don't know exactly when, but we suspect it might be a lot sooner than people think, especially now that the forerunner, Mark Carney, who was more or less pushed over all the way to the side of the other ones that are any type of threat outside of the party, got rid of those right away, one way or by disqualifying them or finding ways to making them deliver them in some way that makes them less desirable to the electorate, so never get them to cut down the competition. Now he has two other people, really. There's Chrystia Freeland, the former finance minister, former Democrat prime minister, who left under what she calls protest because she was protesting the government's policy, of which she was amply wanting to be part of all this time until it all of a sudden became too much, apparently. And, yeah, Mark Carney, who is an outsider, he keeps calling himself outsider, but he's been part of this government for quite some time on the sidelines, even though he's a private citizen with companies in it, which makes him in a tremendous conflict of interest, which people don't always seem, most people don't seem to understand or don't care about for whatever reason, or want to completely ignore because they think at least it's better than the alternative, which for the Liberals is Peter Polliott. And then you have Karina Gould, or I call her Karina Gould, because she's kind of a ghoul, in a way, the way she acts in that. Karina Gould is sort of the middle-of-the-road version of both the two candidates that are running. She tries to act like she's one way, also the other way. She's trying to appease both sides. She's most of us, from more people's thinking, the distraction candidate to draw votes one way from Chrystia Freeland to allow the coronation of Mark Carney, and has been likely promised along the many members of Carney's inner circle a cabinet seat once Carney forms the party leadership. Even though he's not elected yet, he can still appoint a cabinet, even though he cannot sit in Parliament, hence the idea of the election. So let's turn to a more pressing thing. If we break away from the Liberal situation, which is a sort of side distraction, is we got this Trump situation with the tariffs. He imposed the tariffs on it. He kept putting, say, I'm going to do it this day, and he waited for this day, and then this. Now he's finally put them on it. And then the day after he did, he said, oh, by the way, I could be persuaded to pull them back a little bit. If I had a talk with you guys to see, maybe we can figure out where we can make some progress on this issue that I really concerned about is smuggling of both illegal peoples and fentanyl, and the fact that the Canes are insisting, including some parts of the administration, that's not really that big a problem, that's only a small percentage. Well, how do they know? How much do they know? They don't know how much has been making across that is made across the border. Obviously, it's getting across. It's not coming off from Mexico. It's got to be coming from somewhere, especially when they've got so much of it in labs. And if you have one lab, the chances are there's more. Just because you haven't caught them yet doesn't mean there isn't more. There's not enough police force and not police state power out there. And even when the police get them, a lot of times they can't even hold them. So if you can't hold someone that's committed a crime after a crime is committed, just how in the hell do you expect to be able to stop the war on drugs? If you can put these people really back on the streets the next day, starting over again somewhere else while they're having their trial sometimes. They're still doing it while they're waiting for their trial. Why wouldn't they stop? Why would they? They're out. And nobody tracks this. These people should be in jail, held in custody, along with their court pictures, till the trial's over. And then once that, they should be put in jail. You want to keep them in jail as part of the sentence? Fine, I don't give a shit. That's fine. But I don't think they should be given a chance to go out there, even though we know they're alone drumming. We know they're likely that they're on bail. They're going to go back to their same old thing unless they get caught again. And then they go and put them back in jail for a while to the next thing. And then we go and Trump knows this. It's not the Conservatives' fault. It's the government's fault. It's the NDP's fault for allowing this to happen. The Conservative government's been calling this out and cannot change this until they get power. So right now, the Computer Party is in a very precarious position. He can't side with Trump totally because he's a Canadian citizen, he's a Canadian politician, he's supposed to be fighting for the rights of Canadians. And this issue, he has to appear that this issue, from the point of view of Canadians, is an unreasonable response to this, and that we can do this better. and that is not beneficial to that. And in fact, he's pointing out a couple of truths about Canada. That Canada's been made into a nation that's become totally reliant on north-south trade as opposed to east-west trade or trade internationally. We don't do enough east-west trade. We don't do enough international trade. That's complete by design. The thing is that people don't want to. The biggest excuse for east-west trade has been it's too hard to transport east-west because it costs too much. It's easier to transport north-west. Easier. It's much easier to say north-south. It is. You got bigger markets to send to. Obviously, you're going to compel to send to the biggest market, the least costly market. Why do you think airfare is like that? Why do you think it costs more money to fly from Ottawa to Calgary than to fly from Ottawa to Los Angeles? Think about that. Why does it cost more? And Los Angeles is farther, mind you, than going to Calgary. Why does it cost more? It's because of the way that the system in Canada works between the regulatory barriers of plants and the fact that the volume of people traveling at one time to make it cost effective. And that just doesn't apply to people, it applies to goods too. But the thing is, in a situation like when you have high tariffs, it starts making a test case for making things travel east-west. But why can't we? Government, provincial barriers. And another thing, energy transportation. Why can't we send Alberta oil and natural gas to Quebec or Ontario or anywhere else? Governments put barriers in for that too, protecting their own industries for their own best interests because they're trying to protect certain segments of the marketplace. And because of that, and because of those best interests being protected, they're not down to the best interests of all Canadian citizens, they're down to the interests of the certain people that they're countering to in the society. In this case, the Quebecers are parent to the environmentalists. The oil is dirty, but the fact is, every person in Quebec pretty well, or has a family, has a car. Many of them have natural gas or oil heating. A lot of them have electricity because the way the mandate Quebec has made it very readily available because they're attempting to promote that over this. But they all still have cars. There's still trucks driving diesel, dropping their merchandise. There's still manufacturers that have to use diesel trucks to run things goods. The reality is Quebec uses almost as much gasoline and diesel fuel as any other part in Canada. Why would they rather resist making it easier to get to their thing, which could make lower costs for their consumers, lower costs for the manufacturers, and lower costs for all of Canadians? Why would they want to do that? It's because they don't want a future with fossil fuels. They very much, if we could state, even though 60% of Quebecers in surveys want one. So we have to ask ourselves, why are Quebec people electing politicians who are hell-bent on the idea of east-west expansion into a transmitted energy when a majority of the Quebecers, when they talk to them on the side, want it in the first place? Why are they electing politicians that are so hell-bent to stop it? I don't know. And because of that, we've become vulnerable. We've become vulnerable to trade north-south. And Trump knows this. And Trump knows that if he pushes us long enough, we don't have to. He doesn't have to come and conquer us. Parts of Canada will fall away and become part of him or form alliances with him over time, starting with potentially Alberta, the biggest one that has the most money right now. And the second biggest is Ontario, but Alberta's the biggest one because right now Alberta supplies most of the money in terms of transfer payments. It doesn't receive transfer from the government. It supplies transfers to every single part of the country, almost. Major ones being Quebec, second Ontario, and Atlantic Canada. They're have-not provinces. In spite of Doug Ford giving all its money away, the fact is Ontario is not a have province, it's a have-not province. It has a minor deficit and receives transfer payments from the government, which were meant intended to equalize the ability to provide social services to the citizens of Canada on an equal basis across Canada. So why is Ontario, a province that keeps saying it's so prosperous, needing handouts from the federal government, aka through Alberta? Ask yourself that question. And when you get those rebate checks, I love the rebate checks, they're great. I mean, as a person that's on limited income, rebate checks are great, but when you think about from real rebate checks are just other social payments that come out of the deficit, that are created through deficits or through the transfer payments from Alberta. What would happen to Ontario and Quebec if Alberta were all of a sudden decide to leave and take all that revenue with it? And not have to have the hassles of worrying about how to put pipelines in, or developing its resource, or all these other things, if they could become either a sovereign entity that's not affiliated to anyone else, where they have control what's there in all their country, or they decide to become part of the larger country, where it would more gladly let them in. I think what would happen is the little provinces would fall one by one, and Canada would cease to exist. This is what exactly Carney wants. in order to create a global system, you have to reduce the number of countries. That's step one. Trump is proposing, through a very, very satirical manner, the policy that Carney and others want to do. The European Union was the first attempt to reduce the actual countries, because what happens when you're from the European Union, you make the European government, or the Euro government, override the governments of each sovereign country. What do they call that? Canada or United States. Canada and United States are basically Europe, because each province is actually a sovereign state, much like the sovereign states that exist in Europe. Now, with Britain breaking through Brexit and resisting that force, maybe that's a good thing, that they resisted their attempt to globalize Europe in the first stage of globalization, make the European countries no longer sovereign, but under the flag of one banner, one currency. It makes it easier to and compress the rest of it. The best way to cause the world to become global is to reduce the number of small sovereign states. Or at this point, reduce the power of these sovereign states to be truly sovereign of each other. And the Euro Alliance does that. Much like if Canada, the United States, and Mexico were joined together, that alliance would definitely do it. If South America did the same thing, that would definitely do it. If Russia and China and all that did it, that's started to do it. If those two joined together with Europe, and that was starting to do it. And then over time, if you did that, and then let the UN be the ultimate arbiter of the only world, the ultimate world government, then what you've done is you reduced all these many sovereign countries that were actually sovereign states into themselves being just another layer, just a lower layer of this world government. This is what the globalists want us to do. One is, do humans want this type of overlord? Do we want this level of control, where one small group of people in one place makes the decisions, the big decisions for everybody in the world, not just the people in one municipality or one country or one province or whatever? Or would we rather have a system of multiple layers of sovereign states with sovereign governments inside those sovereign states, in terms of, like in the case of Ontario and all our cities in most countries, which are sovereign areas within the sovereign state of the province or state of that particular country, and then loosely federated by an organization like, in the case of America, the United States, and Canada, the nation of Canada. I don't know. I really don't know. The thing is, these are the big questions of that. So right now, the whole problem with that, if you got Trump threatening to do tariffs, everyone's getting scared. There's Canadian politicians running around trying to figure out the best way to deal with this. Pierre Poilievre, obviously, he has to make sure he's very careful, because he's not in power yet. He wants to be in power, but he has to be able to produce an alternative to what the government is doing in terms of what their intended policy is, to give people some sort of policy hope. But at the same time, he still has to look and appear that he's tough on Donald Trump. He cannot appear in any way, shape, or form that he's capitulating Donald Trump, because they're already saying he's Donald Trump. They're already saying that he wants to, like I said, get back doing the globalist thing. But ultimately, the thing is, what the truth is, the liberals are the ones that would love this to happen and are making this happen by letting it happen. Pushing Donald Trump to the point that eventually he will do the very one thing they keep telling everybody that they want to stop from happening. The best way to let something happen is to let it happen. To do nothing and let it happen. And then you can blame anyone. Then you can blame someone else. It's not their fault. We did everything he wanted, and he still did this to try and pacify the people until such time as they no longer have relevance or any power, which ultimately would happen if America invaded Canada. These leaders would be completely thrown out, and America would take over, and these people would become totally irrelevant. So that's the only problem with the only problem with globalism is, as the globalists fold in the system, the people that want this type of globalist power, who think that globalism is the answer, by folding nations into each other, realize that they'll eventually get replaced by other people that take over. They're going to be a power struggle between the people that want the globalist thing and the person that precipitated, not necessarily on purpose, but by the fact that it was forced upon them to do because there they were left with no other alternative to deal with the problem, the bigger problems of their own nation that were being caused by the nation of, in this case, Canada, above them. And the thing is, these issues can be dealt with. We don't need to have Canada and the United States from one country in order to solve these things. We just need to have someone in power in the government that understands the fact that we have to take care of our own citizens. We have to solve our own crimes. We have to make a very clear case of being in sync with the policies of what things are legal and legal with the countries around us in the world, in this case, the biggest name, the United States, and police our own situation to the satisfaction of not just the Americans, but our own people. And take care of their own people. And if we do that, then the Americans don't have a problem with us. So at least they have less problems with us. So I think the real issue is clear. Canadians have the choice. They decide, do they want the Liberals who have destroyed this country, along with the NDP who helped them, aiding and abetting the cause? Their only relevance is because they took advantage of their system that the Liberals, unfortunately, could not get enough support to take on the mandate themselves, and the radical left Liberals went to the NDP instead, therefore thinking that that would be a good thing because they thought delusionally that they may actually get power. Let's face it, the NDP will never get power. Too radically left. Governments in Canada, in order to run, usually are centre-right or centre-right. And if you look through the history of all successful governments in Canada, they are a combination of one of those two predominant traits. They're never radical left or radical right. And they never will be. They never will be. So let's remember that next time if and when we get this election, the question you have to ask yourself is, what sort of candidate do you want to have behind? And who you think represents that candidate? And what are the consequences if we don't put things right in terms of how the world responds to us, how Trump responds to us, and how we respond to ourselves, how we respect ourselves? Canada Pride is great. I love this idea that Canadians are finally proud, but not at the expense of booing the Americans. The American citizens are not responsible for it, even though they voted for Donald Trump. The fact is, we're responsible for our irresponsible policies that led to the Americans reacting the way they are, that the American politicians had to react the way they did. Donald Trump is just reacting in a more extreme way to get the attention of Canadians what the real issues. And our ownership is loving it because they're using it to exploit it to try and fake nationalism, fake that they're national, that they actually care about Canada, and that we're going to protect ourselves by putting more tariffs, which in the end will damage our relationship, instead of focusing on what the real way of dealing with it says, expanding trade, dealing with our crime issues in our country, providing a stable government with a mandate to do these things, which we don't have right now, and taking care of our own backyard first. And if we take care of our own backyard and take care of our own citizens, the rest will ultimately take care of itself. Anyway, that's just my right for this week. I hope to be able to get back in the rest of my computer that I normally set my files on. I call it my server. It's not really a server, just another computer I store a lot of hard drives on. Has had some difficulties with it, and that sort of led to me to not do this. That was the excuse I had for not doing this. I just said, well, this is enough. I better get to work. I can't do this in spite of that. I can get that worked at one time. That should not preclude me recording videos. I start the video rig. I do a little bit of tweaks on this particular computer to change the templates of the files where the template don't come off that computer, which is fine because they don't really need to come from that computer anyway. They can be saved here locally, and I can still save the files on that computer and upload them to my cloud account, which is what's going to happen. I will upload this video to YouTube. I don't know. It's right now midnight. March 5th, including me March 6th. My beloved Monica is getting her tax money soon, so we're going to be doing a little bit of shopping this week and taking care of some things that lovely income tax refunds which is basically reminds you that you paid too much taxes in the first place. You gave your money to the government for free, interest-free, for a period of time because you're afraid to have to owe the money. People have the rationale, I'd rather not owe money, and they owe me money, than me owe them money. Crazy strategy. But a lot of us, none of us can save. A lot of us are not good savers when it comes to being able to save. Unfortunately, well, we're really not taught how to manage our money, well, among other things. Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope to be on next week. I might do a video this weekend. I have a lot of catching up to do. I was at the recent Send Skills competition, and I did some video there that I might upload for you guys to show sheet. I was at the event, a little bit of video I recorded my new phone. I also have more things to discuss. I want to start talking about some of the topics I've got on my bulletin board that I wrote down. I've got to write down my notes and put that so I can start making up some presentations and some topic things and that make some shows about some of the issues. A lot of the stuff is related to what I'm talking about now in terms of the historical relevance of how we've all got to this place that we are now in terms of the modern governments we have today and this modern relationship we have between the United States and Canada. All this is very relevant, as well as the international relationship with other countries, obviously, because it is a very complex issue. Politics is not a simple issue, as most people have any chance to look at it will realize, even though the television tend to make it simple for the average person to understand. Unfortunately not. Anyway, that's my podcast for today. I'm Mike, and this is my Loonies Worth. Like, comment, and subscribe. Send any email requests for comments. You can post on the YouTube channel, or you can send them to info@intimemedia.ca. That's info@intimemedia.ca. My name is Mike. This is my Loonies for this week. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.